Now with the former Home Affairs Secretary, Mike Pezzullo. Mike, thanks so much for your time once again. Last week, we discussed your prediction about how this was always really aimed at China, but now there's a realignment going on. Trump has always been worried about the fairness. I mean, I guess my first question to you is, what will happen next, or what should happen next from America's point of view?
Good morning, Laura. We should just start by distinguishing between two things. One is how we're getting to that place and how we've gotten to the place we're in, which very self-evidently the package you just showed there from Annalise is exhibiting signs of whiplash and volatility, and Ambassador Greer being caught out in that congressional committee. Everyone's watching that and everyone understands the uncertainty, so I don't really need to pile onto that because everyone else is talking about that. And you've seen that play out in equity markets, bond markets and the rest of it. What the President and his administration are trying to do, though, actually speak to real issues that need to be addressed. Now, whether they're going about it in a sensible fashion, history will judge, and I'm sure there'll be lots of memoirs written and historians will be poring over this week and the next few weeks for a very, very long time. There'll be a lot of books written about this. What they're trying to achieve, though, is to reset a number of key security and economic balances which are out of balance. China's dominance, particularly its industrial firepower, its dominance of global manufacturing, is distorting the global economy. It's causing the massive trade deficit that America's experiencing, which the President talks about often, but it's also preventing other countries from industrialising because they're just simply hoarding and concentrating so much industrial capacity in China. One data point, I'll just use one in the brief time we have together. At the moment, they're roughly about 33% of global manufacturing. Mm-hmm. They're on their way to 45% in only a few years. And if they keep going at this rate, unless there's stagnation and economic fracturing in China, they'll reach 50% of global manufacturing. Very few economies have ever had that. Britain probably at the height of the Industrial Revolution, and America immediately after the Second World War, when everyone else's economy was broken and they outproduced everyone. Think about that. China, only the third economy in the world to be globally dominant in that regard. The President clearly sees that both as a strategic problem, which it is, and an economic problem. Why is it a strategic problem? Because they control supply chains. We saw during the pandemic, for instance, how reliant all of us were on their goods. And strategically, it's a problem because it gives them a war machine. They can quickly repurpose industrial production, real manufacturing, into, regrettably, weapons of war. So he's addressing a real set of issues. Is he going about it the right way? Well, I think history will be debating this for decades to come.
They certainly will be, but as you point out, this is an enormous opportunity for the United States as well. Donald Trump stood up at that dinner just a couple of nights ago and said, you know, everyone's trying to come to him and kiss his butt, essentially. Those words almost exactly from Donald Trump, from the European Union to Vietnam, other countries in Asia wanting to negotiate. They're at the negotiating table. So what should America do next?
Well, they could go one of two ways. And again, it's a question of whether they've got the right strategy. I think they're addressing real issues. Whether they've got the right strategy is an open question. They could do it bilaterally. It'll exhaust their representatives. They'll have to go from sort of room to room or phone call to phone call, dealing with, you know, Botswana on the one hand, and Botswana's got a trade surplus with America because of its diamonds. What are they going to do about Botswana? Someone will need to speak to the penguins on Heard and McDonald Island, and of course there's the larger economies as well. The other way to do it is to actually take a leaf out of American greatness in the past. When they convened, for instance, in 1944 at the famous meeting at Bretton Woods that set the basis for post-war prosperity, where the US dollar was the central reserve, it was pegged to the gold standard. Everyone prospered as they reconstructed their economies. That was 1944. Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard for reasons we won't get into now in 1971, and then they just kept resetting through accords. They dealt with currency issues, trade imbalances, current account issues. They've done it before, including under President Reagan, for instance, where Jim Baker convened a very important meeting in New York. American greatness, where they deploy their financial and strategic power in the collective interest of broadly the West, but it's a larger construct these days, could be done again. What you could do, for instance, and I'll be publishing a note through ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute strategist website, in just over an hour, is to call together what I call the G7 plus. So get the G7 plus India, Australia, Korea, Mexico is very important here. Indonesia, both it's a large economy, but it also is speaking on behalf of the other ASEAN partners. The European Union to deal with the countries in the EU that are not in the G7. That is 67% of global GDP. They could have a Bretton Woods-style conference. They could have it wherever the president chose to have it as the chair. They could address these trade imbalances, these structural issues and these strategic issues. And then over time, as you struck a new accord, and I'd call it the Pax Americana Accord, the American peace. Pax Americana is a phrase that we strategists use to look at the peace that was established after the Second World War that underpinned the prosperity of the post-war world. You could have a new Pax Americana Accord. And you could bring in then other countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, United Arab Emirates and others. And then what's left on the table is then the big issue, US, China. And I saw your package earlier where Chinese spokespeople are saying that they won't be intimidated, but they're going to have to give on this because these imbalances are not sustainable.
No, they're not, and Trump has made this very clear. But in this escalating trade war, often trade can be a precursor to all-out war. Now, I'm not suggesting that is what we're on the cusp of, but there is a major security element to this, isn't it? As tension between the world's two largest economies grows, surely there's those defence pressures, those security pressures that are escalating too.
Well, Laura, you're absolutely right. Think about this scenario. The president does a deal, either by sort of room hopping and doing these individual deals or doing it through some sort of collective accord process, which I've outlined to you, with everyone but China. Central to that deal is that if you want to engage with America in terms of security benefits and economic benefits, you'll block re-exports to the US so that the Chinese can't overcome my tariffs by re-exporting through places like Vietnam, Indonesia, Cambodia, Mexico. If the president gets that deal up, which would be the deal of the century from America's point of view, where do the Chinese exports go? Now, China will push back very hard on that because that is a fatal stab into the heart of their manufacturing dominance. Maybe the discussion with President Xi is a discussion held behind closed doors and in confidence that says, look, we can work together, but your lack of structural reform, you're sitting on this manufacturing hoard, you're hoarding manufacturing capacity, is actually detrimental to your own people. As your population ages, you should be devoting more resources to aged care, disability services, health services. In other words, you should become a more normal economy, like all of us have become, switch to services and divest some of that manufacturing so that other countries can get rich because of their comparative advantage, like Vietnam and Mexico and other countries, and we can all prosper. But by sitting on this mountain of manufacturing capacity, you're distorting these global imbalances, and then it becomes, Laura, really quite binary. Like either the Chinese agree to that proposition, which is unlikely, or the Americans back off, or they indeed continue. And that's the point at which economic tensions, as per your question, really start to translate into very, very challenging security questions. I'll leave you with this one historical vignette. It's not directly applicable at the moment, but in the end, after 10 years of a strategic expansion in Asia in the 1930s by Imperial Japan, they'd gone into China. Once they invaded Indochina in 1941, what did the Americans do? They froze their financial assets so that they could not buy oil. The Japanese government said, we're going to run out of oil. They attacked Pearl Harbor. We're nowhere near that, Laura. Absolutely we're nowhere near that. I just want to stress that to your viewers. But there is a chain of consequences where if you don't address these financial, trade, commercial imbalances, they can potentially, and I just want to stress potentially, become something else.
Well, Mike, plenty to think about. Thank you so much for your time, as always, on AM Agenda. We'll see you soon.